News of the times. The Whitley murder. Greed, power, and a crime that shocked Edwardian Britain. London, 1927. In today's episode of News of the Times, we turn to one of the most talked about crimes of Edwardian England, the murder of William Whiteley, a case that stunned the public and exposed deep tensions beneath Britain's booming retail age. In 1907, Whiteley was one of the most powerful shop owners in the country, presiding over a vast commercial empire at a time when department stores were transforming how Britain shopped, worked and lived. But when gunfire rang out inside his own establishment, the crime sent shockwaves far beyond the scene itself. This was not just a murder, it became a national talking point. Newspapers debated motive, morality, money and responsibility. Public sympathy was sharply divided. Some saw Whiteley as a titan of industry, others as a symbol of unchecked power and rising prices. The case struck a nerve in a country already uneasy about wealth, labour and fairness. In this episode, we explore the killing itself and the dramatic courtroom aftermath, why this case mattered so deeply at the time, how public opinion turned a single crime into a social reckoning, and what the press reaction reveals about Edwardian Britain on the brink of change. And in today's end of episode further particular story, in 1922, a grocer's horse made an unscheduled contribution to the luxury goods market. For a short but glittering interval, Moorgate was quite literally paved with gold and diamonds. So, settle in, pour yourself something fortifying, and join us as we step back into 1907 and revisit the Whiteley murder, a crime that exposed far more than a single act of violence. Department stores in 1907, a new way to shop. By the early years of the 20th century, the department store was still a relatively new and rather astonishing concept. For most Victorians, shopping had long meant small, specialised premises, a draper for cloth, a grocer for food, a jeweller for valuables, each visited separately, each transaction personal, cautious, and often conducted on credit. The great department stores changed all of that. Under one vast roof, customers could browse clothing, furniture, jewellery, household goods and luxuries previously beyond their reach, all displayed openly, priced clearly and intended to be looked at, not merely requested. Fixed prices replaced haggling, window displays replaced word of mouth, and shopping became, for the first time, a form of public leisure. In cities like London, these stores were symbols of modernity and ambition, brightly lit palaces of commerce that promised progress, comfort and respectability. They also represented something more unsettling: concentrated wealth, expanding power and the quiet erosion of traditional trades. To step into one of these establishments in 1907 was rather like stepping into the future. And no store embodied that future more completely than Whiteley's of Bayswater, where modern commerce would meet very old grievance. Led by the dynamic owner of the store, William Whiteley, who was famous for declaring that he could supply anything from a pin to an elephant. Illegitimacy and respectability in Edwardian England. In Edwardian England, a person's birth mattered, often more than their talents, character, or conduct. To be labelled illegitimate, the brutal word of the day was bastard, was not merely a private sorrow, but a lifelong social mark. Respectability rested on lineage, on named fathers, lawful marriages, and orderly family histories. When those antecedents were uncertain or unacknowledged, doors closed quietly but firmly. In employment, in marriage, and in social standing. For such children, the identity of the father was no small matter. If he were unknown or unwilling to acknowledge responsibility, the stain could follow them for life. But if the father was a man of means or position and could be persuaded, compelled, or shamed into recognition, everything might change. A name, a settlement, or even a discreet allowance could lift an illegitimate child several rungs up the social ladder, transforming prospects that would otherwise remain bleak. It is with this unforgiving framework, where reputation carried weight far beyond truth, that the tensions of this case began to take shape. From the People, the 13th of June 1926, William Whiteley shot down by a man claiming to be his son. Who would ever forget the sensational news that flashed through London like wildfire on a bitterly cold day in January 1907, when it became known that the wealthy proprietor of the great Bayswater stores which bore his name had been shot dead in his own office by a man claiming to be his illegitimate son. Here, right on its own doorsill, the public found itself supplied directly with the closest thing that could possibly be found in the way of scandal, and, to add piquancy to the dish, provided by the man who styled himself the universal provider. For scandal it was, of the worst imaginable description, when the romantic details gradually came to light. It seemed almost incredible. Here was a man, a notable public figure, almost Gladstonian in his massive personality, known by name to hundreds of thousands of people who crowded into his mammoth establishment in Queen's Road, Bayswater, found to be involved in a life more appropriate to an Eastern potentate than to a 20th century product of Occidental commerce. And yet, the drama that gradually unfolded bore no lack of embellishment. From every point of view, it was a most unsavoury revelation of a double life on the part of a man who, in his business, employed thousands of girls. From the Pall Mall Gazette, the 24th of January 1907, Mr. Whiteley shot dead. The Press Association is informed by the Daily Chronicle that Mr. William Whiteley, the universal provider of Westbourne Grove, was shot dead this morning by a man who afterwards attempted suicide by shooting himself. The Press Association adds, it appears that about 10 minutes past 1 o'clock, Mr. Whiteley was in his shop when a man approached him and, drawing a revolver, shot him dead in the presence of assistants and a number of customers. The assailant afterwards turned the revolver on himself and fired. Whether with fatal effect is not yet known. The shop at once cleared and the police and medical assistance summoned, but Mr. Whiteley was already beyond human aid. For the public, the shock was immediate and profound. William Whiteley was not a private man cut down in obscurity. He was a household name, a figure whose portrait appeared in advertisements, whose stores were visited daily by thousands, and whose very slogan slogan, the universal provider, had become part of London's commercial language. To learn that such a man had been shot, not in a street, not in the dead of night, but inside his own establishment in the middle of the working day, was almost beyond comprehension. Even more disturbing was the manner of it. This was no robbery gone wrong, no sudden riot or political outrage. The assailant had approached Whiteley directly, in full view of staff and customers, and fired at close range, a deliberate personal act carried out in one of the most public spaces imaginable. And then came the detail that truly unsettled the nation. Almost at once, reports began to circulate that the man who had pulled the trigger was not a stranger at all, but someone claiming the closest of connections, a son, an illegitimate son. If true, it transformed the crime from a sensational killing to something far more disturbing, a private reckoning played out on the public stage, involving money, reputation, and a lifelong secret kept out of sight. It was this possibility, more than the gunshots themselves, that ensured the Whiteley case would not fade quickly from public memory. From the People, the 13th of June. The curtain rose on this amazing drama at about 12:30 on January the 24th, 1907. A young man, good-looking and well-dressed, came into the emporium and asked to see Mr. William Whiteley. He said that he had come from Sir George Lewis, the famous solicitor, who had acted for Mr. Whiteley, and with that instruction he succeeded in seeing the man he wanted. 20 minutes to half an hour later, Mr. Whiteley came to the door of his room and said to one of his employees, "Go and fetch a policeman." The man went out and left Mr. Whiteley still standing at the door of his room. A messenger, who happened to be in the stall, saw him standing in that position for a moment or two, and then saw Mr. Whiteley's visitor come out of the room and push him. A few words of angry conversation passed, then the visitor pulled out a revolver from his pocket and fired 2 shots at Mr. Whiteley, who dropped to the ground dead. This was the tragic end of the founder of that great business. Immediately afterwards, the man fired a 3rd shot into his own head and fell. The policeman who had been sent by Mr. Whiteley arrived to find the 2 men lying close together on the ground, one dead and the other in an exceedingly critical condition, although conscious. A doctor was immediately summoned, and he ordered the removal of the murderer to St. Mary's Hospital. There he lay, hovering between life and death for many days, but by the care and attention of the staff there, he was slowly nursed back to life. It was not, however, until February the 19th, nearly a month later, that he was sufficiently recovered to be taken from the hospital to be charged by the police, and from the police court he was removed straight into the infirmary at Brixton Prison. On admission to the hospital, he had said to the casualty surgeon who attended him, "My name is Cecil Whiteley. I am the son of Mr. William Whiteley, and I have shot Mr. Whiteley. I have shot myself and have made a mistake. Give me something to make me sleep away. There's a good boy. I am quite conscious." In his trouser pockets were found some leaves torn from a pocket-book on which were written, "To whom it may concern, William Whiteley is my father. He has brought upon himself and me a double fatality by reason of his own refusal of a request perfectly reasonable. Rest in peace." There would be no prolonged public dwelling on the inquest itself. The facts of the killing were, in essence, uncontested, and attention quickly shifted from how William Whiteley had died to what would become of the man who had fired the fatal shot. Rayner did not escape the scene unscathed. The self-inflicted bullet had completely destroyed his right eye, leaving him in constant and severe pain. Prison officers later stated that from the moment the shot was fired, he was scarcely free from agony, suffering intensely throughout his confinement. Whether sympathy the public might feel for his circumstances, there was no doubt as to the gravity of the act itself. With his admission, Rayner was formally charged with wilful murder and committed for trial. By this point, the case had already escaped the confines of legal procedure and entered the wider public imagination. Newspapers across the country followed every development closely, and anticipation mounted as the trial approached. Crowds gathered, columns multiplied, editorials speculated not only on guilt but on motive, morality and responsibility. Remarkably and controversially, intense public sympathy began to gather around the man who had committed the killing. Once Rayner's assertions were made public that he was the illegitimate son of William Whiteley, the case took on an entirely new and volatile dimension. To the investigative reporters of the day, it was an irresistible prospect. A wealthy retail magnate, a fatal shooting inside his own establishment, and now the suggestion of a concealed private life. The ingredients of scandal lay ready to hand. Journalists began digging with renewed energy. Before long, accounts emerged of two young women, sisters, who had been provided with living quarters by Whiteley, housed together in a single residence for which he paid the rent, and visited there by him. The revelations, once printed, sent a visible ripple of unease through Edwardian society. The personal history underpinning Rayner's claim had become deeply tangled, not least because it involved multiple households, shifting names, and relationships that were never openly acknowledged. At the centre of it all were two sisters, Louise Turner and Emily Turner. In November 1862, Louisa Turner entered the employment of William Whiteley at his Westbourne Grove establishment. Within a matter of weeks, she later claimed Whiteley had seduced her and persuaded her to leave service and live under his protection. Some years later, arrangements were made that bound both sisters more closely to Whiteley's financial support. In January 1883, a furnished house was taken in Kilburn, not in Whiteley's name, but in the name of George Rayner. Whiteley paid the rent and personally purchased some £300 worth of furniture for the property. The house was occupied by Louisa and Emily Turner together, and Whiteley was known to visit. 2 years later, on the 15th of September 1885, Louisa Turner gave birth to a son. Significantly, two of the child's given names were Cecil and Whiteley. By around 1888, following a serious quarrel, Louisa Turner and Whiteley parted company and did not live together again. The prisoner himself, Horace George Rayner, had been born earlier in 1879. According to Louise Turner, Emily, the younger sister, had also previously given birth to a child. In both cases, it was said that William Whiteley was the father. In the case of Emily's child, Louisa stated that George Rayner had explicitly repudiated paternity. What emerged then was not a single clear-cut claim, but a web of overlapping relationships, financial support without public acknowledgement, children without named fathers, and a powerful man whose private conduct had been carefully kept separate from his public reputation. It was from within this ambiguity and this long history of silence that Horace Rayner's fatal claim arose. As for the Whiteley store as an institution, the effect of what was considered a highly sordid background by Edwardian standards was immediate on the business. Here was a department store marked as a respectable institution for the entire family, wives, children, and servants alike, now linked in the public mind to whispers of moral duplicity. Sales faltered, custom wavered. The name that had once stood for modern convenience suddenly carried an uncomfortable ambiguity. For the remaining members of the Whiteley family, the priority became painfully clear. While the law prepared to try Horace Rayner for his life, the family, acutely conscious of what was at stake, instructed their representatives to do everything possible within the confines of the courtroom to dampen the flames of scandal. It was against this charged backdrop of public outrage, commercial anxiety, and a courtroom heavy with unspoken implications that the trial finally began. From the Daily Mirror, the 23rd of March, 1907. Quite apart from the facts of the case, Rayner's appearance in the dock was bound to evoke much sympathy. The self-inflicted shot had completely destroyed his right eye, and it was obvious to everyone in court that throughout the day of his trial he was in great pain. The shot had inflicted such injuries that hardly for a moment from the time of it being fired had he been set free from pain. The prison officers said he had suffered agonies during the time of his confinement. His hair was combed straight back from an intellectual forehead, and he possessed a small, shapely mouth and a clearly defined eyebrows which were good to look upon. But the right side of his face was a pathetic wreck, with the blind eye, the deep dent in the nose, and the powder-discoloured flesh. Once Rayner was well enough, the case went to court. The trial took place at the Old Bailey on Friday, March 18th, 1907, before Lord Alveston, Lord Chief Justice of England. Prisoner Horace George Rayner's testimony, his simple story. From the first time, a flush of excitement reddened the prisoner's pale face. When late in the afternoon he went into the witness box to tell the story of the fatal interview with Whiteley on January the 24th, the afternoon of the murder. He gave his evidence calmly and straightforward. He spoke deliberately, weighing each word before he uttered it. His voice was pleasant and refined, and his manner was that of a man who was telling the truth. His story was simple enough. A desperate man who had heard enough of the mystery of his birth to believe he was the son of the millionaire shopkeeper. He had decided to make an appeal to his supposed father's generosity. This appeal failed. The game was up. He had resolved, in case of failure, to blow out his brains. He produced the revolver and told Mr. Whiteley he should shoot himself. The resolute old man sent for a policeman. Rayner went mad with anger and in his rage fired the shots which killed the rich tradesman and left himself wrecked and disfigured for the vengeance of the law. Very possibly Rayner spoke the truth, if not the whole truth, but true or untrue, the story was not one which would influence the decision of an English jury, nor did the prisoner appear to expect it. Rayner's evidence. Rayner told his counsel that from his earliest years he had always been known by the name of Horace George Rayner, and he always regarded Miss Emily Turner as his mother, and up to a certain point Mr. George Rayner as his father. Rayner went on to say that in his early days he remembered living in the house in Grenville Place in Kilburn, but he could not tell how long he was there. He used to see Mr. Whiteley at breakfast every morning. Rayner went on to say he also remembered being in Brighton, and there again he saw Mr. Whiteley, his mother, and Mr. George Rayner. After that he went to boarding school. That was about 1896. Finally, said Rayner, when he left school he went to reside with Mr. Rayner at his chambers in King William Street, Charing Cross. That would be when he was about 15 years of age. He did not know where his mother was. She had left Rayner then. Rayner used to tell him when he was in a drink that he was no son of his. He told him that on more than one occasion that he ought to go and see Mr. Whiteley, as he had more claim on him as a son. He continued, at 17 I went to Russia. I helped Mr. Rayner in his office. Rayner added that he was at Riga for 7 months, but when he returned home and went to Mr. Rayner again, after a while he left owing to a difference of opinion. He went to Bewdley, then to Leeds, and then to Birmingham. Then he got a post as a private secretary to Sir Henry Burdett. He was then connected with the Gordon Hotels, with whom he remained for 3.5 years, and he left owing to a change in the directorate. No regular employment. He continued, I borrowed some money from my wife's aunts and started a business as a commission agent in the city, and at the end of 1905 I went to Russia again, where I was for 4 months. When I returned, I was unable to get regular employment, and things went from bad to worse. I had to pawn, and it made me a little erratic. I had to go a good deal without food. Rayner explained, I think and still consider that I had ample grounds for calling on Mr. Whiteley for assistance, at least for the kind for which I asked. I decided last Christmas to blow my brains out when I was at Rowton House, but I had not the money to get the revolver which was in a pledge. My mother had told me before her death that if ever I was in want and I went to Mr. Whiteley and mentioned her name, he would assist me. For 2 weeks I debated whether I should go to him, having regard to the fact that it was many years since I had seen him last. I thought I would do so, and then, in the event of my failure, I would commit suicide. Under these circumstances, I went down to see him. I had on that morning had several glasses of brandy, as I did not know really whether I was justified in putting to myself such a gamble, my own life against his good will. As it were, however, I decided to go. I decided beforehand if I blew my brains out, no one should discover my identity, for the sake of my wife and family and the scandal that might arise. For that reason, I left my papers at the tube station. I knew if I gave my own name, I should not get to Mr. Whiteley, so I gave that of Sir George Lewis. As soon as I got access to Mr. Whiteley, I told him I had gained access under false pretences, and that my name was Horace George Rayner. He, William Whiteley, said, "Oh yes, sit down." We sat facing each other. He said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "I believe I am right in saying, Mr. Whiteley, that your son is speaking to his father." He said, "Is that so? When did you see me last?" I mentioned the circumstances that I had seen him at Hove, and there saw him last. I mentioned the desperate straits to which I was in, but I made no proposition with regard to him helping me. He asked what business I had been brought up to, and I told him as a clerk. He said I ought to have had a more useful occupation. After taking some time without getting much nearer the object of my visit, I put it to him, "Can you assist me in any way? I shall be pleased if only I can get employment." I mentioned no question of money. He said I must not mix myself up with what has passed. Of course, it is all very fine, but there are two sides to every question, and you have only heard one side. I made no comment. He asked if I wanted to go abroad. I said I should be glad, but that I could do nothing without capital. He said many young men did well abroad without capital, and told me to go to the Salvation Army immigration offices. I was nettled at this, to think that he should have had so little sentiment for a blood relation. I asked him if he absolutely refused to help me, and he said I must not. I said I've made up my mind to blow out my brains, and he said don't talk so silly. I produced the revolver and put it to my head, and he said put that thing down. I staggered for a moment. I had a feeling of revulsion against Mr. Whiteley. My head was in a whirl. I thought, if he is not amenable to sentiment and sense of duty, perhaps he may be amenable to a sense of fear. I made up my mind that I would play that card, but without any intention of carrying it to effect. I tore some leaves from my book and began to write. After I had written the best part of it, Mr. Whiteley got up and went towards the door. I asked if he would stop, and he took no notice. I got up to see what had become of him, and saw him standing outside. It occurred to me that he had thought he would wait outside to hear me shoot myself. I think my mind was not improved by the knowledge of that fact. I went towards him and extended my hand in a friendly way, and asked him to come in again and not leave the matter like that. He said, I've sent for a policeman. That is all I remember of the circumstances. The actual shooting and what was on my mind at the time, I know nothing about. The prisoner went silent. His remarkable story was at an end. There was no cross-examination. From the Daily Mirror, the 23rd of March, 1907. Romance of Two Sisters. The name of Louisa Turner, the prisoner's aunt, was called. There was a buzz of excitement anticipating in the crowded court. Tall, slim, dressed almost entirely in black, and wearing a pince-nez, she stepped into the box and began her evidence in a quiet, even voice. Miss Louisa Turner told the story of his birth and the manner in which Mr. Whiteley had entered into the lives of her and her sister. She established that her sister, Emily Turner, gave birth in April 1879 to a son, Horace George Rayner, the prisoner at the bar. At the time, Emily was living with George Rayner, who was generally regarded as acting in the role of her husband. Louisa told the court that she herself had always understood Rayner to be the child's father, and that she had not known if he had ever repudiated that responsibility. She then describes her own later relationship with William Whiteley, entering his service in November 1882, moving under his protection in January 1883, and giving birth later that year to a son named Cecil Whiteley. In her account, Whiteley's involvement in the lives of both sisters was not fleeting, but sustained, financial, domestic, and deeply personal. Yet, for all its detail, her testimony stopped short of making any unequivocal claim about Horace Rayner's paternity. Louisa did not state that William Whiteley was Horace's father, nor did she say that Whiteley had ever acknowledged him as such. Instead, the court was left with overlapping relationships, private arrangements made in other men's names, and assumptions that had never been tested openly until now. Her evidence also revealed the fracture point, a bitter quarrel in 1888 sparked by Whiteley's suspicion that Louisa had renewed relations with George Rayner, an accusation she denied, and which Whiteley later withdrew under threat of legal action. What emerged was not a single clear narrative, but a picture of long-standing ambiguity, a family history shaped by secrecy, discretion, and the careful avoidance of public acknowledgement. At this stage of the proceedings, there was no real dispute about the central act itself. Horace Rayner had shot William Whiteley. That fact was never seriously contested. What the court was now being asked to consider was not whether the killing had occurred, but how and why. The defence set about constructing a picture of a man shaped by secrecy, rejection, and long-standing emotional strain, a childhood clouded by uncertainty, a family left precarious and unsupported, and a grievance that had quietly festered for years. Witness by witness, the jury was invited to look beyond the revolver and into the inner life of the accused, to see not a calculating murderer, but a man driven to breaking point by circumstances he neither created nor could escape. It was upon this foundation that the defence would rest its final plea, that Rayner, at the moment he pulled the trigger, was not master of his reason, and that the killing, although undeniable, had been committed in a state of temporary insanity. From the People, the 13th of June, medical witnesses. No evidence concerning Rayner's sanity. 2 medical witnesses recalled for the defence to speak of Rayner's lack of mental control. Mr. Elliot meant to give the jury the loophole of anything that the prisoner was insane, although his demeanour in the witness box had been that of a man in the possession of his full senses. Sir Richard quickly countered this move, realising, as did all the other lawyers in the court, that the jury would have been only too glad to avoid finding a verdict of guilty in the pitiful circumstances surrounding the case. Sir Richard therefore asked both medical witnesses one question only. Do you say the prisoner is insane? No, both doctors replied. Realising that the jury might bring in a verdict of insanity, Sir Richard then asked the judge to rule that there was no evidence to go to the jury concerning Rayner's sanity. The Lord Chief Justice agreed, and in his summing up directed the jury accordingly. There were 2 issues left to the jury: guilty or not guilty, and as Rayner had already confessed to the murder, there could be no alteration to the verdict of guilty. The Lord Chief Justice sentenced Rayner to death. With the news of the guilty verdict, there arose a most astonishing state of affairs. A petition for Rayner's reprieve was caught up and supported wholeheartedly by the press of the country. Crowds clamoured to sign it, and the Home Secretary's office were besieged. He had to suspend all other work and open special addresses for its signature. Hundreds of thousands of people employed in factories and offices and huge concerns from the principals down to the office to sign the petitions. As the time for the petition being presented grew near, the crowds increased, and it became obvious that if Horace Rayner was hanged, there would be a public outcry such had never been heard before. The Home Secretary, realising the extent of public feeling, wisely reprieved the prisoner and commuted the sentence to one of penal servitude for a term of 20 years. And so the case ended not with the drop, but with a retreat. Legally, there had been no doubt at all. Horace George Rayner had fired the shot. He had confessed. The medical witnesses could not call him insane. The jury, directed firmly by the court, had no lawful alternative but to return a verdict of guilty, and the sentence of death followed as surely as night follows day. In the end, the Whiteley murder exposed more than a single act of violence. It laid bare Edwardian Britain's discomfort with wealth, legitimacy, power and responsibility, and its growing unease with the justice system that could punish a crime yet struggle to account for the circumstances that created it. William Whiteley was dead. Horace Rayner lived, and the country was left to argue, long after the courtroom emptied, whether justice had truly been done. Epilogue. Rayner paid the price of his crime within a very short time of coming back to the world a free man. He served 12 years of his sentence and died a couple of years after being released. After the murder of William Whiteley, control of his retail empire passed to a board that included his sons, and the business continued to expand. Within a few years, the decision was made to relocate and rebuild the store in a grand new purpose-built building on Queensway, which opened in 1911 and was then claimed to be one of the largest and most luxurious department stores in the world. In 1927, the store was acquired by an American retail magnate, Harry Gordon Selfridge, founder of Selfridges, marking the end of the Whiteley family ownership and the beginning of a new corporate chapter. Further particulars. Just when one imagines that London's streets have seen every conceivable indignity, along comes a grocer's horse to demonstrate that even the diamond trade is not immune from equine interference. What follows is a brief moment in 1922 when Moorgate quite literally sparkled, not through civic pride or municipal effort, but because a startled horse took it upon himself to redecorate the pavement with several £1,000 worth of jewellery. The Daily Mirror, the 21st of March, 1922. Jewel-bedecked horse. Runaway which caused London Street to be paved with gold. Dashing into the shop of Messrs. Bentley Brothers, jewellers of Moorgate, a runaway horse attached to a grocer's van yesterday put its head through a plate glass window. Gems which became entangled in the harness fell to the ground as the animal withdrew and galloped on. Thousands of pounds worth of diamond rings, brooches, bracelets and other jewellery littered the pavement, and most of them were picked up and restored by passers-by. The runaway was not checked until it collided with another van and fell to the ground. That concludes this look into the world of shopping in Edwardian England. We hope that you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy this episode, please do give it a like, share it on, and subscribe, perhaps with that one friend who treats department stores as a competitive sport. You know the one. If you're feeling particularly generous, a hype apparently counts as the modern equivalent of 10 gold stars, several approving nods, and a quiet round of applause. So thank you sincerely to those who leave them. And for those who'd like to go a little further, all of our archive, ad-free episodes and early releases are available on Patreon for the price of a modest cup of tea. It's the best way to support the channel and keep these stories alive. Find us at News of the Times Historical Crime at patreon.com. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, part-time historian, full-time archivist of human folly, occasional mutterer at footnotes, and currently accepting applications for someone to return the library book I lent them in 2009. Until next time, thank you for watching.